Congratulations for getting through all those intro tutorials. I know it's a lot of work, but you're learning a lot. And if you followed along in all of them, then you should have a strong foundation for your 2D drafting. And I keep on teasing that in the next video, we're going to get to the 3D modeling stuff, but I keep on remembering important things that we need to cover. These actually are important steps on our journey to creating that 3D version of our drawing. But we need to talk right now about layers and classes. It's a really big concept that we haven't touched much on. If you have your navigation window open, then take a look there. I don't think you really need the navigation palette once you get more comfortable with it, because you can do pretty much everything that does in other places. But for now, make sure you have it open on the screen because it might help visualize what we're doing here. And if you've closed it, remember you can always go up to Window and Palettes and then select any palette you have closed and reopen it. You can also right-click with a context-sensitive pop-up menu there and see that that same palettes is kind of a shortcut to that there as well. So a couple of different ways that you can open that. Again, I don't think you're going to need it in the future, but for now, it's a good idea to have it on so you can see what you're doing. And again, most of what this can do can either happen in the right-click context menu or up in the view bar. So notice that these two icons for classes and layers are the first tabs in the navigation palette, and they're up here in the view bar as well. So these icons look a little different in earlier versions, but their positions are the same. So let's look at the layer tab first. It's probably already open in your document, but if not, just click on the icon that looks like a stack of paper. And by default, we only have one layer, Design Layer 1, and you can think of layers as sheets of drafting. You might have a plate that has the plan of your site or your theater on it, and then another with the foundations of your building, or maybe one for platforms, etc. So for theatrical ground plans with multiple scenes, in the past I've made a layer for Act 1, Scene 1, and then another layer each time is a major scenic element change. I tend to do that with classes these days, but both will work. So you can basically use layers and classes as ways to organize your drawing. And you can see why the layers icon is a stack of pages. And you can think of layers as separate views in your drawing. And way back before we had sheet layers and viewports in Vectorworks, that's how we would set up a multiple plate of a drawing. And you can still do that if you want to work in the old school 2D workflow that we've been using so far. But let's make a new design layer by right-clicking in the blank space on the Layers tab of the navigation palette. Make sure you're on that stack of paper, the Layers tab, and then right-click. And you'll see that New is right up at the top. Go ahead and select that, and then name it 3D View or whatever you want, and click OK. The name is just for your reference. If you look close, you will see that there's a check mark just to the left of the active layer, and that the text is bold. And since we just made the new layer, Vectorworks has switched us over to that layer. Let's look at the Layer Options menu just above it. And there are lots of places, and I'll show them all to you, where you can switch these. But let's use it right here for now. If it's set to Show Others, then nothing visually should have changed on your screen. And go ahead and select Show Others from that list there if it's not already selected. And now hit the X key for the selection tool and go ahead and select anything on your drawing. Aha! Something is different. We can't select anything on Design Layer 1 where our door drawing is. So now switch the option to Show Snap Others, and then select our old friend the rectangle tool, hit your 4 key, and then start drawing a rectangle anywhere on the screen. And then notice that in Show Snap Others, we can hover over points on Design Layer 1 and get snapping hints, even though we can't actually select anything on the other layer. Go ahead and finish your rectangle by clicking on it, and then set the layer option to Active Only. And now, only your rectangle should be visible, as we're only showing the active layer, and we just drew that rectangle on the active layer, the 3D view layer. And you can see that check mark and the bold text lets us know that we are on that 3D view layer. It's also up here in the active layer in the layer field of the view bar. So now click just to the left of Design Layer 1 in the navigation window, just below where the check is now. And by doing that, you've switched to the design layer, and your rectangle should be hidden. We'll look up in the view bar and it will read Design Layer 1 again. So now reach up to that drop down and select 3D View from that list. That's another way to switch layers. So look back in the navigation palette, and now 3D View is bold and the check mark is back to the left of that name. Notice that you can also make a new layer with the menu in the mode bar. Notice that New Design Layer is the first choice in that menu. Back to the layer options, shift from Active Only to Gray Others. And now we can see our door drawing in gray, but we can't snap or select anything. And I bet you can figure out what Gray Snap Others does. Obviously that leaves the other visible layers gray, but allows you to snap to it. So snap others is exactly the same. It just draws the other visible layers normally. And then finally, show snap modify others allows you to reach through the layers and change anything on another layer, just as if you were actively on that layer. So now right click on a blank spot somewhere in the viewport and see that context pop-up menu that we were looking at. And notice that near the bottom, there's a flyout for layer options, also for class options, just like the menu in the navigations bar. And by the way, that works for classes as well. And this is what I typically tend to use when I want to switch classes. And notice that I keep saying visible layers. The navigation palette also has 3 columns on the left side under visibility. These are the boss visibility settings. Notice that there's a little open eye icon in the furthest left column, just like in Photoshop or Blender or many other tools that have some kind of layer or organization system. The open eye means that the layer or class is visible. And I'll click on the center column of the design layer 1. Now design layer 1 has disappeared even though I have the layer option set to gray snap others. So the X on the left of this layer is the master control switch for visibility. If it's off here, it's not visible anywhere, regardless of the other settings. And if I click on the right column, we can see that our door is gray. Even if I change the layer options to show others, it remains grayed out. So I'm going to click the check in design layer 1 and notice that the current active layer is always visible, regardless of any other settings. Even if I click in the middle column and set the design layer 1 to hidden, nothing changes in the viewport until I select another layer. There's one other way to create and control layers. Left click on the layers icon in the view bar and notice that there's another way to change layer view options here as well. And we can create or delete or edit layers. But we're going to select Show Organizational dialog box at the top. And this opens a window that's very similar to the navigation palette. And here I can click the new button to create a new layer. I can click to edit or change some default settings. I can duplicate or delete the layer. I can add metadata tags to it. I can change the page setup for a layer. Each layer can have its own page settings and resolution and whatever you want. And notice that there's also a tab here for classes as well as sheet layers that we'll get into in future videos. And all of this will become more important, but for now, go ahead and click cancel. Just know that it's there. Okay, so what's the difference between layers and classes? Padawan philosophers have been pondering that question for ages. Not really, but you can use them however you want. You can click on the furthest left tab in the navigation window and see that we have shifted to classes. Everything I just showed you about layers is exactly the same with classes. Well, sort of. So what's the difference? Well, there's a hint with the 2 classes that we have already. We have the none class where every object we have drawn is on, except for the dimensions. Notice that if I click the middle visibility column to the left of dimensions, that all the dimensions are hidden. When we added our first dimension, Vectorworks automatically added a dimensions class, and then all the dimensions that we created were added to this class. To explain classes further, let's make another one. We could right-click again, but this time let's come up to the Classes button in the view bar and select New Class up here. Name it Labels, or whatever you want, but I'm going to call it Labels. Now switch over to Design Layer 1, either by selecting it on the Layer tab of the navigation palette, or by picking it from the list in the view bar. And now Shift select the 2 labels at the bottom of our drawing. And then look up on the object info. It should say 2 text blocks. If it doesn't, then hit your X key twice and Shift select again. You might have grabbed something else by accident. Notice that the very first drop down up here is Class. And then below that, we can see that these labels are also on Design Layer 1, which makes sense. That's where we drew them. Currently, the 2 text blocks are on the None class, as we can see here. So click on this drop-down and select Labels, the class that we just made, from the list. And now you've moved the text from the default None class to the Label class. So right-click and select the class options and select Active Only. And look what happened. As we're currently on the None class, the dimensions and the 2 text blocks have disappeared as they are on different classes. So now select Show Snap Modify Others from the Classes menu in the view bar, and now the dimensions and the labels are visible again. So you can right-click and use the Context menu options, or the Class and Layer Options menu in the navigational palette, or the list under the classes or layer menus in the view bar. All of them do the same thing, and use whichever version you like best. I typically use the right-click context menu, as I told you. I don't usually have the navigation palette open, and reaching up to the view bar is just too much bother for me, but you do whatever makes you happy. So what are classes for? Anything you want. Architects typically will use classes for different building components. Maybe you have a class for framing, one for electrical, one for plumbing, another for HVAC, etc. And that way it's easy to organize a drawing with lots of parts. A theatrical lighting designer might have a class for the theater lighting battens and the hang positions, and then one for the light objects themselves, and then another one for the circuit labels and channel labels and jug colors and accessories and DMX cables and power supplies and whatever. So it's a way to control lots of different parts of your drawing. And once you get the hang of using them, it'll become invaluable to keeping a big project organized. Let's switch back to the 3D view layer and delete anything on it, like the rectangle there. With the selection tool, drag a marquee around the parts of the front view of the door, and you should have 7 objects selected if you added the doorknob and the escutcheon plate. If not, then don't worry about those. With those objects selected, Control or Command C, Control C to copy them. Or you can right-click and select copy from the context menu if you want, or you can go up to the edit menu. Now switch to the 3D view layer, in whichever way you want to do that. And then I'll switch the view options here to gray others to make it clear what we're doing. Okay, so now Control or Command, Alt or Option V. So if you're on the PC, you're going to Control Alt V. If you're on the Mac, you're going to Command Option V. And that's going to paste in place. And again, if you forget that shortcut, you can use the edit menu at the top of the screen and then paste in place. So when you use paste in place, Vectorworks will put the copy of the object in exactly the same spot that the original was. So this also works with cut and paste in place. So if you just Control or Command V without the Alt option held down, then it will just paste the copy in the center of the viewport or wherever you last clicked. Notice that the object info shows that the pasted objects are on the None class, but on the 3D view layer. So now we have our original drawing back on design layer 1 and a copy that we will use to make our 3D version in the next video. So lastly, let's change the default name of design layer 1 because that's kind of a boring name. In recent versions of Vectorworks, most of the names are editable just by double-clicking on them. So I'm going to double-click on the name here in the navigation window and change it to Ortho View or 2D View or whatever you want. And you can also change the name and even the scale in the organizational window. So now switch to the 3D View layer and set the layer options to active only so that we hide everything but the parts of our door that we just pasted. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how to use these 2D parts to get them prepped and ready to go for our 3D model. I promise we're getting there. We're closer, one video closer.